And so he started learning from the legendary Dutch Mantell. So these little pocket areas like Dutch Mantell had in West Texas.
And then as far as his training, do you know anything about the training of Ed Welch?
I don't, but I do know what the style was back then. I mean, we in the style of the wrestling back then, man, it was a tough business. I mean, we're talking about grappling, we're talking about strangling guys, we're talking about limb twisting, we're talking about headbutting, biting, eye gouging, and out of this style,
A good old Texas Oklahoma battle sounds like to me.
That's right.
man, out of this style, you had guys that were known as shooters, hookers, rippers, world beaters, barnstormers, and these guys are the stuff of legend, man. And you know that we read about them in some of the books that have been published recently on wrestling history. But I mean, it was a rough, tough business. That's why you come across guys that had an eye missing, or you know, when Jerry Jarrett tells that story about Galinto coming in the ring and him, you know, taking his eye and pulling his eye out. That was every match, you know, back then. I mean, guys were doing that kind of stuff to each other for, you know, a submission or a throw, and you know, the winner was the toughest guy in town. And that's kind of the environment that Ed broke into the business in, and as he started getting Roy trained, you can imagine what that was like.
Where was he wrestling during the time? I mean, where was, like, for example, where was say, because this is what year was this that you're talking about approximately?
It would have been in like 1910 through 1920s up to 1925.
Okay, so you had
like
Farmer Burns around still wrestling a little bit, certainly training some people. You had Gotch and you had Hackenschmidt. Strangler Lewis had just kind of started. Londos was still probably on the West Coast, probably not doing anything yet.
Mm-hmm.
But where was the world of wrestling at the time?
So you had and this is what we're going to get into when we get into the 30s, and this was part of the genius of Roy Welch, is that Roy saw the macro world of wrestling that you just described with the big guys, you know, that were the heavyweights that were traveling around the major cities. And Roy was brought up where the guys fought in towns, you know, like Salazar, Oklahoma, or Fort Smith, Arkansas, and he'd seen his dad, you know, wrestle in these Arkansas and Oklahoma and Texas towns. And then he went to work in Texas as an oil field worker in Borger. And so he started learning from the legendary Dutch Mantell. So these little pocket areas like Dutch Mantell had in West Texas and in New Mexico and in Ohio with Al Haft, they were kind of operating underneath all of these big Strangler Lewis and the Goldust Trio and all these famous guys that were going to the, you know, the cities of like Chicago and LA and St. Louis. You know, they were going to the small communities where, you know, you were the town bully and you were trying to be the champion of your town.
So same thing that you have now, or you've had for almost forever for minor league baseball, minor league sports, you know, tier two towns. Is it
Independent wrestling?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. Tier two towns. You have the big guys running the tier one towns. These guys are making a lot of money running tier two towns because they have less competition there, right?
Yes, that's right. And Roy really saw that. We're going to get into that. That's how he kind of came up with the concept of his first territory. But right now, around 1928, he lives in Borger, Texas, and he sees Cal Farley and Dutch Mantell. And he goes to Dutch Mantell and he asks him, you know, he tells him, you know, I've wrestled a little bit and I'd like to, you know, do it for more of a living, and I'd like to break in, you know, with you. And Dutch says, okay, well, you know, let's get in the ring and see what you got. Well, the first time he trains him, Mantell breaks his ribs with the leg scissors. And he's
with
tested.
The leg scissors. Wow, powerful legs.
He gets him, you know, he gets him in a body scissors with his legs and he breaks his ribs. Roy goes away for a couple of weeks, and you know it's one of the things they used to do back in those days. Let's see, you know, if this guy comes back. You know, is he worthy to be in the business? And Roy goes away. He heals up. He comes back. Second time, Mantell breaks his wrist, and Roy wouldn't quit. And so he came back again. And so that impressed Dutch Mantell. And he decided, okay, this guy, I kind of like this guy. So he makes Roy his protege and starts using him as his second in matches. You know, Dutch was he took over the business from Cal Farley and Amarillo about this time, around 1930. You know, he booked the original Four Horsemen. He worked out a deal where he would be the talent supplier. So he kind of had his own booking office there in Amarillo where he would train guys. He'd send them over to Lubbock to wrestle. He'd send them to Borger to wrestle. And so Roy started falling in with that crew. And that's where he would meet these guys that would become his lifelong friends, and they would play a big part in Roy's success. Guys like Charlie Lay, guys like Sailor Moran, guys like Pat Malone, Charlie Carr, Pat O'Dowdy, all these hookers and shooters that had been trained by Dutch Mantell would be Roy's friends as he would go off to do other things.